Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were hiding the biggest truth about your life? Stay with me because this story begins with a funeral and ends with a secret that shattered an entire family. The day my grandmother died, nobody cried harder than my mother. At least that's what everyone believed. I stood beside her grave feeling completely lost. My name is Nalathando. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a community librarian in Durban, South Africa. I lived a simple life. I never chased wealth, status, or attention. Family was everything to me. Or at least I thought it was. My grandmother, Gugulethimbeka, was the one person who always made me feel loved. She called me her sunshine. She never missed a birthday, never forgot a dream I shared, and never treated me differently from anyone else. But during her funeral, I noticed something strange. My relatives weren't grieving. They were nervous. And before the week was over, a letter from my grandmother would reveal a secret my family had hidden from me my entire life. A secret that would change my name, my future, and everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. The day we buried my grandmother was supposed to be a day of grief, love, and remembrance. Instead, it felt like something was terribly wrong. As I stood beside her grave, watching the coffin slowly disappear beneath the earth, I felt my heart breaking. My grandmother had been the one person who always made me feel safe. Losing her felt like losing a piece of myself. Around me, relatives wiped away tears and spoke softly about what an incredible woman she had been. But the longer I watched them, the more uncomfortable I became. Their sadness didn't seem genuine. It felt forced. Every few minutes, I noticed family members pulling each other aside for private conversations. They kept looking around nervously as if they were afraid someone might overhear them. My mother, Zanil, barely spoke to anyone. She looked tense and distracted. My father, Sizwe, spent most of the funeral checking his phone and whispering to my uncles. Whenever I walked near them, their conversations immediately stopped. They would force awkward smiles and quickly change the subject. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination. Everyone grieves differently. Maybe they were discussing funeral arrangements or family matters. But as the day continued, the strange feeling only grew stronger. After the burial, everyone gathered at my grandmother's house. The atmosphere should have been warm, filled with stories and memories about her life. Instead, the house felt heavy with tension. People stood in small groups speaking in hushed voices. Several relatives looked frightened rather than heartbroken. While carrying dishes into the kitchen, I accidentally overheard part of an argument coming from the dining room. "What if she finds out?" someone whispered. "She can't," another voice replied sharply. That was the agreement. Then I heard words that made me stop in my tracks. The documents must stay hidden. And this must never come out. A chill ran through my body. The voices suddenly fell silent when they realized I was nearby. Everyone looked at me with expressions I couldn't understand. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen and heard. My grandmother was gone, but somehow it felt like she had left behind something much bigger than grief. For the first time in my life, I had the unsettling feeling that everyone in my family knew a secret about me. And I was the only one who didn't. 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, I was still struggling to accept that she was gone. The house felt empty without her voice, and every corner seemed to hold a memory of her. I kept replaying the strange events from the funeral in my mind, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. That morning my phone rang unexpectedly. The caller introduced himself as attorney Bekinkosi Dlamini. I recognized the name immediately. He had been my grandmother's lawyer for many years, and someone she trusted completely. His voice was calm but serious. "Nalathando, there is something your grandmother instructed me to give you personally. I need you to come to my office today." My stomach tightened. When I asked what it was about, he simply said, "It's important. Your grandmother wanted you to receive it only after her passing." The entire drive to his office felt endless. Questions raced through my mind. Was it related to her will? Had she left me something? Or did it have something to do with the strange conversations I overheard at the funeral? When I arrived, Attorney Dlamini greeted me warmly but looked unusually nervous. After we sat down, he opened a locked cabinet behind his desk and carefully removed a large sealed envelope. The moment I saw my name written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting, my heart skipped a beat. He placed it gently on the desk. "Your grandmother prepared this years ago. he said quietly. She instructed me to keep it hidden until after her death. She was very clear that nobody else was allowed to access it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. If you are reading this, my sunshine, then I am gone, and your family can no longer stop the truth. I stared at the words in shock. My grandmother knew something so important that she had waited years to reveal it. As I continued reading, tears filled my eyes. She explained that she had spent years protecting documents, records, and evidence that others wanted buried forever. She believed I deserved the truth, but she knew certain people would do everything possible to keep it hidden. Attached behind the letter were several old files, photographs, and legal documents. I had no idea what they contained, but one thing became clear immediately. The secret my family had been hiding was real, and my grandmother had just handed me the key to uncovering it. My hands were shaking as I continued opening the documents my grandmother had left behind. Part of me wanted to stop reading. Something deep inside me was already warning me that my life was about to change forever. But I couldn't look away. I needed answers. The first document appeared to be an old birth record. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw my name. Nalathandom Becca. My eyes moved slowly across the page until they reached the section marked Mother. The name written there was not Zanil Mbeka. I blinked and looked again. It still wasn't Zanil. Instead, the document listed a woman named Lindelwa Mbeka. I froze. There had to be a mistake. For 29 years I had believed Zanil and Sizwe were my parents. They raised me. They celebrated my birthdays. They comforted me when I was sick. They were my family. But according to the document in front of me, neither of them was my biological parent. My heart began racing as I grabbed the next file. Inside was a letter written by my grandmother. Through tears I started reading. She explained that Lindelwa Mbeka was her eldest daughter. My mother. My real mother. The words felt impossible to understand. I had never heard that name before in my life. Not once. Not at birthdays. Not at family gatherings. Not during holidays. It was as if she had never existed. The letter revealed something even more heartbreaking. Lindelwa had died shortly after giving birth to me. She never got the chance to hold me for long or watch me grow up. Her life ended just as mine was beginning. Tears rolled down my face as I tried to imagine the woman I had never known. But the biggest shock was still waiting for me. My grandmother explained that after Lindelwa's death, the family made a decision. Instead of telling me the truth when I was old enough to understand, they agreed to raise me as Zanil and Sizwe's daughter. The truth was buried. The story was changed. And Lindelwa's existence was erased. Photographs disappeared. Her name was never spoken. Questions were avoided. An entire life had been hidden from me. I sat in silence, staring at the papers spread across the desk. Suddenly, so many things from my childhood felt different. So many unanswered questions now seemed connected. For 29 years, I believed I knew who I was. But in a single afternoon, everything I thought was true had fallen apart. And the more documents I uncovered, the more I realized this was only the beginning of a much bigger secret. After learning that Lindelwa Mbeka was my biological mother, I thought I had already discovered the biggest secret of my life. I believed the pain couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. Over the next few days, I spent every free moment going through the boxes of documents my grandmother had hidden for years. The more I read, the more confused I became. Something didn't make sense. If my family had only wanted to protect me from a painful truth, why had they gone to such extreme lengths to erase Lindelwa from existence? I started searching through old family photo albums at home. Growing up, I had looked through those albums dozens of times. I knew every picture by heart. But now I looked at them differently. Suddenly, I noticed strange gaps. There were years where certain photographs seemed to be missing. Some pages showed signs that pictures had been removed. In several family portraits, there was an empty space where someone appeared to have been cut out. The realization sent chills through my body. Someone had deliberately removed Lindelwa from our family history. Attorney Dlamini helped me access additional records that my grandmother had preserved. Hidden among the documents were copies of old photographs. For the first time, I saw my mother's face. I couldn't stop staring. She looked so much like me that it felt like looking into a mirror. We had the same eyes, the same smile, and even the same dimples. Tears filled my eyes as I realized that my own family had kept this woman from me for nearly 30 years. But the deception went even deeper. The records showed that Lindelwa had been an exceptional woman. She graduated with honors, received community leadership awards, and worked on several important development projects. Yet nobody had ever told me about any of her achievements. It was as if her entire life had been erased. Then I found letters and notes exchanged between relatives shortly after her death. The instructions were clear. Do not mention Lindelwa. Do not discuss the past. Do not tell Nalathando anything. Reading those words made my stomach turn. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. A coordinated effort involving multiple family members. And then I discovered something even more disturbing. According to my grandmother's records, the secret was never truly about protecting me from heartbreak. That was the excuse everyone used. The real reason was far bigger. Several documents referenced ownership agreements, inheritance records, and promises made shortly before Lindelwa died. Her name was connected to assets and legal rights that should have passed to someone else. To me. For the first time, I understood why everyone had worked so hard to keep her hidden. If Lindelwa's story came to light, a much larger truth would come with it, and that truth had the power to change everything. Once I realized how much of my mother's life had been hidden from me, I knew I couldn't stop searching for answers. Reading documents and looking at old photographs was no longer enough. I needed to know who Lindelwa Mbeka really was. I needed to understand the woman who gave me life. Using the names and addresses I found in my grandmother's records, I began visiting places connected to my mother's past. Every step felt emotional. It was like following footprints left behind by someone I should have known but never got the chance to meet. The first place I visited was the secondary school my mother had attended. I wasn't sure anyone there would remember her after all these years, but I was wrong. An elderly retired teacher agreed to meet me. The moment I mentioned Lindelwa's name, her eyes widened. "Lindelwa Mbeka?" she asked. Of course I remember her. For the next hour, she shared stories I had never heard before. She described my mother as one of the brightest students she had ever taught. According to her, Lindelwa was intelligent, hardworking, and always helping others. She wasn't the type of person who only dreamed about success for herself. She wanted success for everyone around her. Then the teacher looked at me carefully. "You mean nobody ever told you about her?" I slowly shook my head. The sadness on her face told me everything. As the days passed, I met more people who had known my mother. Former classmates, coworkers, and old friends all reacted the same way. They were shocked that I knew almost nothing about her. One former coworker even pulled out an old photograph from a drawer. When she handed it to me, tears immediately filled my eyes. There was my mother standing beside a construction site, smiling proudly while holding building plans. She wanted to create affordable housing for struggling families, the woman explained. That was her dream. Every person I spoke to added another missing piece to the puzzle. I learned about her kindness. I learned about her determination. I learned about her dreams. Most importantly, I learned how much she loved helping people. The more stories I heard, the more painful the truth became. These memories should have been part of my life from the beginning. I should have grown up knowing who my mother was. Instead, an entire part of my identity had been taken from me. Driving home after another meeting, I looked at the photograph resting on the passenger seat beside me. For the first time, I felt connected to my mother. But I also felt something else. Anger. Because every new story revealed not only who Lindelwa was, but how much of my own history had been stolen from me. Just when I thought I had uncovered the biggest secret about my family, attorney Bekinkosi Dlamini called me with news that would change everything again. His voice sounded serious. "Nalathando, I've found something you need to see immediately." An hour later, I was sitting across from him in his office. Several thick files were spread across his desk. Some of the documents looked old and worn, while others appeared to be financial records that had been carefully preserved for years. As I sat down, he slowly pushed one file toward me. "What you're about to read may explain why your family worked so hard to hide the truth about Lindelwa." My heart immediately started racing. I opened the file and began reading. The document showed that years before her death, my mother, Lindelwa Mbeka, had owned a significant stake in a property development company. It wasn't a small investment. The company had grown steadily over the years, and became involved in several successful housing and development projects. At first, I didn't understand why this mattered. Then I reached the next page. The ownership records revealed that shortly after my birth, Lindelwa's shares had been legally transferred to me. To me. Not to my grandparents. Not to my aunt. Not to my uncle. Not to the parents who raised me. To me. I stared at the document in disbelief. If these records were correct, I had legally owned part of that company since I was a newborn baby. My hands began trembling as I looked up at Attorney Dlamini. Then why didn't anyone tell me? His expression said more than his words. Because someone didn't want you to know. The deeper we looked into the records, the worse things became. Although the shares legally belonged to me, they had been quietly managed and controlled by other family members for decades. Every year the company generated income, profits were distributed, investments were made, and assets continued growing. Yet I never received a single explanation. I never saw a report. I never even knew the company existed. The financial statements revealed something even more painful. While I was working long hours at the library and living a simple life, several relatives had benefited from money connected to assets that should have been protecting my future. Suddenly, so many things started making sense. The expensive houses, the luxury vehicles, the comfortable lifestyles. Things I had never questioned before now looked completely different. As I turned the final page, a terrible realization settled over me. The secret was never just about hiding my mother's identity. It was about hiding what she left behind. And the people who claimed they were protecting me had spent nearly 30 years making sure I never discovered what was rightfully mine. Didn't take long for the news to spread through the family. Somehow, everyone learned that I had my grandmother's documents. They knew I had seen the letters, the photographs, the legal records, and the evidence connecting me to Lindelwa's hidden estate. The same relatives who had barely spoken to me for years suddenly wanted my attention. My phone started ringing constantly. Calls came from cousins I hadn't heard from in months. Aunts who rarely visited suddenly appeared at my door. Uncles who once ignored my messages now wanted to meet for coffee and talk about the past. At first, I thought maybe they finally wanted to tell me the truth. I was wrong. Every conversation felt the same. Everyone had an explanation. Everyone had an excuse. And somehow, nobody accepted responsibility. One afternoon, my mother, Zanil, arrived at my apartment unexpectedly. The moment she sat down, tears filled her eyes. "We did it because we loved you," she said. "You have to believe that." For a moment, I wanted to believe her. After all, she had raised me. She had cared for me throughout my childhood. But then I asked a simple question. If this was about love, why was my mother's name erased from every photograph? She couldn't answer. Instead, she looked away. A few days later, my father, Sizwe, called. His version of the story was completely different. He claimed the family had hidden the truth because they feared it would emotionally damage me. But when I asked why they also hid the company shares and inheritance records, he suddenly changed the subject. The more conversations I had, the more contradictions appeared. One relative said the decision was made to protect me. Another said it was my grandmother's idea. A third claimed nobody knew about the financial assets. Yet the documents proved otherwise. Every excuse seemed to fall apart the moment I compared it with the evidence. That was when I finally began seeing the situation clearly. None of them were truly worried about my feelings. If they cared about my feelings, they would have told me the truth years ago. They would have allowed me to know my mother's name. They would have let me understand where I came from. Instead, they had hidden everything. Now they were afraid. Not because I was hurt, not because I was angry, but because I knew the truth. The panic in their voices wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear that the full story would become public. Fear that decades of secrets would finally be exposed. And fear that once everything came into the light, they would no longer control the narrative they had spent nearly 30 years protecting. For the first time, the balance of power had changed. And everyone in the family knew it. A week after the family began scrambling to explain themselves, Attorney Dlamini called me again. This time his voice sounded different. He wasn't surprised anymore. He sounded disturbed. "Nalathando," he said quietly, "I think we've uncovered the full picture." When I arrived at his office, several large boxes sat on the conference table. They were filled with financial records, company statements, legal correspondence, and archived files that had been collected from different sources. Looking at the mountain of paperwork, I immediately knew this wasn't going to be another small discovery. For hours, we reviewed document after document. The first record showed annual income generated from the development company shares connected to my mother's estate. Every year, profits had been paid out. Every year, investments had grown. Every year, the value increased. The numbers were shocking. I had always considered myself an ordinary person. I worked hard, paid my bills, and lived within my means. Yet according to the records, assets connected to my name had quietly generated wealth for decades. But the money wasn't what hurt the most. It was what came next. As we dug deeper, we found emails exchanged between relatives over many years. Some were old printed copies. Others had been saved digitally and preserved by my grandmother. One email made my stomach drop. She cannot know about the shares. Another said, if Nalathando asks questions, tell her nothing. Then there were letters. Signed letters. Letters discussing how information about Lindelwa should remain hidden. Letters instructing family members not to discuss certain documents. Letters outlining exactly who would manage assets until further notice. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. This wasn't a single bad decision made during a difficult time. This wasn't one relative making a mistake. This was a coordinated effort. Multiple people knew the truth. Multiple people participated. Multiple people benefited. For nearly 30 years, they maintained the same story. Every birthday, every family gathering, every holiday, every conversation, the same secret, the same lie. As I sat there reading page after page, something inside me changed. For years, I had wondered why my grandmother waited so long to reveal everything. Now I understood. Without evidence, nobody would have believed me. But with these records, nobody could deny the truth. The documents didn't just expose hidden money. They exposed intentions. They exposed planning. They exposed choices. What started as a painful family secret had become something much larger. A carefully maintained deception that lasted almost 3 decades. And for the first time, every piece of the puzzle was finally falling into place. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was written in black and white for everyone to see. And there was no way the family could explain it away. After weeks of uncovering secrets, reading documents, and listening to excuses, I finally made a decision. I was tired of private phone calls. I was tired of half-truths. And most of all, I was tired of people pretending they didn't know what had happened. So I invited everyone to one place. My grandmother's house. The same house where countless family gatherings had taken place over the years. The same house where people had smiled, laughed, celebrated birthdays, and shared meals while hiding the truth from me. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. One by one, family members arrived. Some looked nervous. Others looked confident. A few even appeared relieved, as if they believed I was finally ready to forgive everyone and move on. Several relatives approached me before the meeting began. Nalathando, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. We're family. We can work this out. I simply nodded and said nothing. When everyone had arrived, I walked into the living room carrying several large boxes. The room immediately grew quiet. I placed the boxes on the table and slowly opened them. Inside were photographs, letters, financial records, ownership agreements, emails, legal documents. Nearly 30 years of hidden truth. For a few moments nobody spoke. Then I began. Calmly and carefully I presented everything. First came the birth records proving that Lindelwa Mbeka was my biological mother. Then came the photographs that had been removed from family albums. Pictures of a woman many people in that room had spent decades pretending never existed. Several relatives lowered their eyes. Others stared at the floor. But I wasn't finished. Next came the letters discussing how Lindelwa's name should never be mentioned. Then came the emails instructing family members to keep me uninformed. Every excuse I had heard over the past few weeks started falling apart. One relative claimed they knew nothing. A signed document proved otherwise. Another insisted the truth had been hidden to protect me. A letter showed discussions about money and ownership instead. One by one, every explanation collapsed. The room became quieter with every page I revealed. The most powerful moment came when I displayed the financial records connected to my mother's estate. Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. Nobody denied anything. They couldn't. The evidence spoke for itself. For the first time in nearly 30 years, there were no stories left to tell and no lies left to hide behind. The truth stood in the center of the room, impossible to ignore. I looked around at the faces of people I had trusted my entire life. Some were crying. Some looked ashamed. Others simply sat in silence. The family secret that had survived for decades was finally exposed. And in that moment, nobody could pretend otherwise ever again. A few days after the family meeting, I thought the story was finally over. The truth had been exposed. The documents had spoken for themselves. The lies that survived for nearly 30 years had finally collapsed. For the first time in my life, I knew who my mother was, where I came from, and why so much had been hidden from me. But my grandmother still had one final gift waiting for me. Attorney Dlamini contacted me once more and asked me to visit his office. When I arrived, he handed me a small sealed envelope. "This is the last thing your grandmother left for you," he said quietly. I immediately recognized her handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not a legal document. Not a financial record. Just a personal message from the woman who had loved me my entire life. Tears filled my eyes as I began reading. "My sunshine," the letter started. "If you are reading this, then you finally know the truth." I could almost hear her voice speaking the words. She explained that keeping the secret had been one of the greatest regrets of her life. She had wanted me to know about Lindelwa for years, but family disagreements, fear, and pressure had prevented her from telling me sooner. Then she wrote something that broke my heart. "Your mother loved you from the moment she knew you existed." For a long time I simply sat there crying. My grandmother described the dreams Lindelwa once had. She wrote about her kindness, her determination, and her desire to help families who struggled to find safe and affordable homes. According to the letter, Lindelwa believed everyone deserved dignity, opportunity, and a place to belong. Then came my grandmother's final request. She didn't ask me to seek revenge. She didn't ask me to punish anyone. Instead, she asked me to remember who I was. She asked me to honor my mother's legacy. Those words stayed with me. Months later, after recovering control of the assets connected to my mother's estate, I made a decision. Part of the funds would be used to complete the community housing project Lindelwa had dreamed about decades earlier.